Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this legislative recap for 2021. This morning we have some guests. First of all is Brian Fontenot. Representative Fontenot is from District 55, which is the Lafourche area, and he serves on criminal justice and House and Governmental Affairs representative.
It would be municipal and parochial.
Municipal and parochial. And then we also have Representative Mike Johnson, who is up from around Rapides Parish and does District 27. He is the vice chairman of civil law. And then on our end, what's important to law enforcement, he serves on judiciary also. And then, of course, our legislative liaison, Joe Mapes, is on this morning. So, gentlemen, I appreciate you being here this morning and being able to share some information with our members regarding the 2021 session. If you want to, if I've left something out on an introduction, go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more. But let's have a discussion about what was important to us law enforcement wise in this session 2021, and what do you foresee as some important things for law enforcement in the future in 2022, some things that our members can help engage in the process. One of the things that Joe, is our representative, our governmental liaison, always says, he's got the saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we very much take that to heart. And that's why we have started trying to do things like this to engage everyone in the process. So I'll kind of turn it over to y'all. You can pick whoever wants to go first.
I can just briefly. You asked about our background. I've been an attorney now for almost 38 years here in Pineville. I've represented policemen. I've represented firemen. I've been a city attorney dealing with some of the issues. I've been a judge dealing with some of the criminal issues, some of the issues that police face on a daily basis. I've served on the State Police Commission. So I know from a different perspective exactly from a legal and administrative sense what our men and women in law enforcement go through. And before we even get started, I just want to reiterate how important and how much I respect what all of you do. Darrell has been a friend, Basco, and I've observed how hard he works for his members. And certainly we work very closely with him and look forward to even more so. He's been doing it you've been president for about 12 years?
About 12 years. Yeah.
And I've been a representative for about 2. So he's teaching me. I'm learning, and just excited to have an opportunity to do some things that hopefully help all of you do your job in a safer and more effective way.
Thank you, sir. Representative Fontenot.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what Mike said, and let's start with, you guys have 6,000 members, and I think about 38 or 40 lodges across the state. And what makes you unique in that spectrum of the law enforcement professionals is that you are the boots on the ground guys. And when it's time for you to speak up and come to the table, you should continue to press the issue that you are the boots on the ground. You're the individuals that are affecting arrests and dealing with criminals on an everyday basis. You're not an elected sheriff. You're not an elected chief of police. So look, as a former law enforcement professional, 17 years, the rigorous of this job, the mental capacity that it puts you in, the rigorous that it puts on your family. Look, I've lived that for 17 years. I've done what you've done. I've wore the badge, and I'm happy to stand with you. It's part of who I am. And in this business, in the legislative business, there are people who are smart on education and some that are smart on the budget. But I think Mike and I have our finger on the pulse of what's important to you, how to make the job safer, but also how to make the job more productive. And I think that should lead us into what was the biggest challenges that you guys faced this session. And the one obstacle, and I think that you've seen that when you said we are the boots on the ground people, started with qualified immunity. We saw that outside of session, we put all these law enforcement professionals on a committee that came up with what the Sheriff's Association says was a compromise on qualified immunity. And honestly, there is no compromise for me on qualified immunity. When the Sheriff's Association and the chiefs of police came forward and they began to talk about their support about a change in the law, the first thing they give you to ask for your vote was, well, this really doesn't do anything. Well, I'm of the position, and I'm sure that Mike is as well, we shouldn't pass legislation that does nothing. And the perception for the boots on the ground people was that this could affect their jobs. And when your 6,000 members are making, you got to believe, hundreds of thousands of arrests, and we're dealing with convicted felons and crimes in progress, the ability to be protected by qualified immunity should be number one. And there were certain parts of that bill that really was just horrible in nature. And it started with, 928.10, which talked about the qualified immunity that's distributed when you're affecting an arrest with felonies and how they wanted to take that away. I stood with you guys, and I know Mike had a different vote, and he voted with the sheriff, and I know I certainly want to hear from him on what his stance was. We were glad to see that it died in the Senate, but it really died because you guys said, we are the boots on the ground, and this is what directly affects us. So it's important that your members know that when you speak as a voice, that you're going to be heard, and reminding us that you are the people on the front lines is important. That's going to be a battle that's going to ensue again in 2022. We now see that the Democratic delegation is reaching out, not just in the state, but they're trying to find support for doing away with qualified immunity across this country as they talk to other fraternal orders around America to try to get them to come on board and fight against you. We got to stop that. We got to make sure that people understand where this is. And we can argue that, maybe this should be held on a federal level. But right now we're battling for you on a state level. And I'm glad to say that it died, but rest assured that that's just the first of many battles that we will face for qualified immunity.
Right. Qualified immunity will be a big issue, brought up again aggressively. I can tell you that my consideration of that bill was based almost entirely on the fact that there had been a task force that had been working on it for over a year. And it passed out of that task force, I believe, unanimously without opposition. And then the sheriffs got involved, and I believe the chiefs of police, and both supported it. I had real heartburn. You can see texts that I sent back and forth with the sheriff, my sheriff, and I voted with the sheriffs and with what I thought was all of law enforcement and what I thought was with the task force. I quickly realized there's more to it. Got with Brian, and we actually watered it down substantially with an amendment on the floor that I think had a lot to do with killing it. And it was Brian's idea to add a provision that said that if you bring an action against a police officer and you don't win, you have to pay all of his attorney's fees and court costs. And that in essence pretty well took the sting out of that bill. I will certainly be more mindful of the boots on the ground and their concerns about this issue when we get another chance this next spring. What I will say is that, I think part of the reasoning for those of us that really are concerned about our police officers is that I think there's a real likelihood that the courts are going to decide this. It's a court-created provision, and we're already hearing lots from federal court about this issue that it may not even be something that's in our hands. Of course, that was part of the argument, that if we don't do something, the courts will. Well, we hear that a lot. But in this particular case, I still don't fully understand why the Sheriff's Association were so supportive of it. But regardless, I can promise you there's a bunch of us who followed that lead that will listen a whole lot closer to what you have to say and look towards Darrell and others who lead the rank and file on this. But be aware that we probably got some court rulings that are going to do some things that we may not like, that we won't have any input on. And I would think, particularly with the administration we have in Washington right now, that you'll see some movement in some of the select jurisdictions that may affect that issue even before we get back into session next spring. And let me say something else. I know Brian has a lot to say also, but I think this session also showed us that we want to continue to try to work with people. We want to continue to try to do things in a bipartisan fashion. However, what we're seeing in our towns, what we're seeing right here in central Louisiana, what we're seeing in Baton Rouge, what we're seeing all over the state is that police are outnumbered. They can't find enough law enforcement personnel to fill the need in the particular areas. We're at an all-time record crime wave right here in central Louisiana, with murders rivaling cities 3 times our size. And I think it goes directly to the lack of support of our law enforcement, and directly to the lack of prosecution, directly to the idea that we need to be more mindful of those who've committed the crimes and the sentences they get. And I think in my mind, okay, experiment's done. It's not working. We need to get behind those who enforce the law, and we need to get behind the law. I have been particularly taken aback over the last 3 years. I've been in office for 3 sessions, not including special sessions, is that we're so concerned about reform that we're trying to, in some cases, reform things that were working.
Right.
And I think that besides being hit in the head with a baseball bat by Brian Fontenot to tell me, hey man, this is the way we need to go, I've also realized it for myself. So I think you're going to see this next spring at least one portion of the House that is going to be stronger than ever in supporting what's right, what we know to be right. And although we're open-minded, I think we're going to be very strong in supporting law enforcement. We're going to be less likely to move forward with some of the liberal agenda, whether it be decriminalization of marijuana or more, whether it's lightening sentences. I know I am, and I think many of my brethren and sisters in the legislature will too. So we can talk about last year, but I think what you're going to see moving forward is going to be a stronger legislature that's going to be more supportive than we have been, and more absorbent of your opinions and inviting your opinions as we go forward. And I hope we have more time to meet and talk about some of the proposals that'll be coming out this next session than we did this last year. I know COVID's been a factor, but I think it helps if we're more balanced in what we're hearing from everyone before we go and have to vote on some of these bills.
Two comments I'd like to make. One on the qualified immunity is that we as an organization, I kind of have an in with the National Fraternal Order of Police. Our national president is from Louisiana and St. Charles Parish, and a great friend of mine. And one of the things that we're seeing with the qualified immunity issue is what you had both spoke of, that we thought there was going to be some movement on the federal level. And because that hasn't happened, then it's kind of being thrown back at the states for them to do something, which makes a real hodgepodge, throw at the wall, see what sticks type of quote unquote reform, which I think is really a horrible thing. And we have seen, speaking of what Representative Johnson was talking about, across the United States, we have seen other, whether you want to call them failed experiments or what label you want to put on it, we have seen where bail reform and these other types of reform, sentencing reform has taken place, and it's been present for 2 or 3 years, and we're seeing disastrous consequences, whether it's Portland, Oregon, or some of the major cities like Chicago and New York, where their major crime rates are growing, exponentially, not just small increases, but are growing exponentially. I think I saw something from Portland the other day where their violent crime is up like 500-600% from what it was 2 years ago. And I personally, as not just a law enforcement officer, but as a citizen, I don't want my daughter and my wife and my family to have to, be around that type of thing that's going forward. So we've talked about the past and where we're at. So gentlemen, what about the future? What are we kind of looking at for next year, and what can we do to be more engaged in the process?
Look, let's first go to something that could drive money into law enforcement professionals into our community, and that is the legalization of marijuana. Where does the law enforcement community stand, and how do we get to a point where 19 states now have legalized marijuana? And I think the federal government is getting closer to that legalization as well. So we at that pivotal moment right now where Louisiana is probably going to be one of those states that's going to join in the next 3 years. So the question you got to ask yourself is, does law enforcement professionals believe that this is a gateway drug and it's going to enhance people's ability to go out and move on to things like the methamphetamines and the opioid crisis that we're dealing with? And second, what do we do with the funds that's derived from the sales, illegal sales of marijuana? So the first is that I think Mike and I both opposed the bill for the taxation of the legalization of marijuana in the state of Louisiana. And here's the first reason why I did. The author of that bill, Representative Nelson, identified where those funds would be sent to. He particularly said that 20% of the revenue derived from the sales of legal marijuana or cannabis would be sent to the city where that marijuana was sold at. So let's go to Lafayette Parish. The largest bulk of the population lives in the city of Lafayette, but on the outskirts, when you have Scott and some of these other small communities, they could absorb an astronomical amount of money from the sales of marijuana, but the crimes that are derivative of that sales could go out into the parish. So we have to do a better job of where that money is going to be spent throughout the parish and identify what it can be spent on. We should never lose sight of the 64 sheriffs are elected officials. They're politicians. And I want to be rest assured that the money they get from these sales will be spent to enhance drug enforcement efforts inside of our parish. Second thing is, this is a great opportunity for us as a legislative body to look to add to state supplemental pay. We've been trying for years now to increase the amount of money that law enforcement professionals and firefighters get, but this would be a good opportunity now for us to look at an increase in state supplemental pay when we have the legalization of marijuana. So I now serve on a subcommittee and I represent the law enforcement community. And Darrell, I'm not sure if you're on that committee, but we will start the process and I intend to throughout this country and talk to places like Colorado and understand when they legalize marijuana, what was the first consequences? We know that juvenile suicide rate went up by more than 50%. Vehicle fatality crashes went up by more than 30%. So we have to be prepared when we legalize marijuana in Louisiana, what resources we will hand the law enforcement community to stop some of these adverse actions that will take place. I said this in committee and I'll say it now. It's certainly not going to be rainbows and unicorns when we legalize marijuana in the state of Louisiana.
Sure. And one of the things I'll add real quick, Rob Pride, who's our national trustee from Loveland, Colorado, I've had this conversation with him several times. And one of the consequences that he talks about is that when the way Colorado did it and they had the dispensaries come in and everybody's trying to produce the lack of a comparison, the better IPA or the better homebrew or the better bourbon or the better whiskey. He said, you're going from something that was bought on the street that had a THC level of a certain amount. Now they're producing a biological variant of it where the THC level has greatly increased. You have people coming in to Colorado and regular users that are smoking a joint between a husband and a wife. Now they're smoking this super weed, for lack of a better word, and they're smoking the same amount, thinking they have to smoke the same amount. Well, now they're having ER visits. They're having to run an increase in medical costs. They're having an increase in paranoid-related things where people are falling off of balconies and having suicide attempts. So all of those things, Representative Fontenot, I think, is definitely right. It's not unicorns. There's a lot of outside or ancillary consequences that has to be dealt with.
Let's talk about HB 430, which was the Police Officers' Bill of Rights authored by Representative Ted James. I voted yes for this bill, but if you remember, Darrell, I had some questions about the bill, mainly about the time it took for you guys to ascertain legal, consultation, how much time it would take for an agency to conduct its investigation, But the last one that was important to me that we added to this bill that I think we need to re-examine and maybe come back and look at is it said that anytime a police officer was to be found or a complaint sustained against a police officer, that complaint will remain inside the police officer's files for 10 years. We know, Darrell, in this business, an officer will leave Pineville PD and go to Rapid Sheriff's Office for $100 a month. They're trying to pay their families and support their families. Is it really right that an officer speeding to a crime who may have get a complaint sustained against him be in his file for 10 years? I'm of the opinion, no. I think we should look at and say that officer. Did you lose me for a second, Darrell?
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, I had a phone call come in. We should look at and identify which complaints sustained will stay in a police officer's file for 10 years. And I am of the opinion that all complaints involving use of force that are sustained against an officer should remain in his file for 10 years. So that, look, we get some minor complaints, conduct unbecoming of a police officer, reckless operation. Now we're filling up this police officer's files with complaints that we all know that some agencies, especially if it's an elected chief, they'll sustain a complaint for political reasons. So it's important that we go back and re-examine how these complaints remain in an officer's files.
One of the things, and a comment on that, one of the things that we did find out afterwards, of course, when this task force was put together to go back and remind everyone, and I was glad I was chosen by the governor as the representative, even though he threw me off the law enforcement commission after the session was over with. One of the things that did happen was, or that became an issue in the end, was that it was me. I was the sole person being on there. And a lot of our locals and FOPs, the way that it's dealt with is that until it goes through the whole administrative process, that's when the complaint is, quote, sustained. Shreveport PD came in at the last time, and their president came down and spoke, which they have a police officers association that's different from us, came in and spoke and addressed one of the committees and said that the way Shreveport PD did it, as soon as that complaint's filed, it automatically goes into your file. No matter if the appeal is won and the police officer is exonerated, the department still sits there. So I think we need to examine what that definition of sustained is. We maybe need to make that definition better. And I agree with you. Before this legislation, one of the things that it has always been, this was a local government issue. This was part of the record retention policy of that local governing body. If the city of Pineville went to the Secretary of State's office, the Secretary of State said that your record retention policy on personnel files or internal affairs investigations had to be this X amount of time, then that's what it was. And I think, a lot of this is losing sight of how much power you taken away from the Secretary of State. That's what his job is to determine what public record has to be kept for a certain amount of time on that retention schedule. But I do agree with you. You look at a lot of things, and we were bombarded. I think that Criminal Justice Committee or police reform had 22 recommendations, and that's what got by that they felt could go through. But it was a ton more than that. And a lot of them were so egregious that we dealt with. But I'm very open to us going back and looking at the sustained complaint issue.
Yeah, look, if Mike doesn't have a comment on that, let's move on to.
No, I mean, I agree with you. The 10 years is just seems excessive.
Yeah, certain these issues are, but let's go to probably the biggest crisis that the law enforcement community faces right there, and that's the opioid crisis. And how do we not just help the law enforcement communities, but this is an opportunity we have to examine how we're going to help society as a whole. Look, in 17 years, I spent 13 of that working narcotics, commanded narcotics divisions, and understanding the effects of illegal narcotics, not just on our children, but our society as a whole. We've armed law enforcement professionals, firefighters, and EMS with Narcan. And we know that every day across the state, we are saving hundreds of lives. But we're also risking our law enforcement professionals' lives. And we've given no recourse now to be able to stop this crisis. I certainly don't know what the answer is, Darrell. And if I did, we bring it. But I know that continuing to going out and administer Narcan to people, not once, not twice, but there's several individuals in Lafourche Parish, more than 20, that we've saved more than twice. And we have 3 we saved more than 20 times, and 1 we've saved 44 times. So if we continue to save lives and not offer some type of drug rehabilitative services, we're giving law enforcement a disadvantage. We're putting them at harm's risk, where they're always dealing with these individuals that are severely impaired for the opioid crisis. And we've seen just recently, I think in San Diego, where an officer became impaired because he had contact with fentanyl. I think we should probably look at crimes where an individual has fentanyl and a police officer is affected in some way, that it would be an enhanced penalty. If a law enforcement becomes affected by someone's possession of fentanyl, then there should be an penalty. So I think that's a big avenue we got to, look at, whether we form a subcommittee or we come up with some ideas, search around the country. But how do we attack the opioid crisis, the use of Narcan, losing its criminal immunity when we save you 20 times, and being able to let law enforcement focus on violent crimes and crimes against individuals versus these crimes of, drug overdose.
It's one of the things that's horrific. You brought up the San Diego deputy. When I saw it yesterday, it reminded me to have our quartermaster officer to check our Narcan inventory that we have, that we issue to every officer with my department, to make sure that we can administer it to someone on the street that needs it, but also if we do have a policeman that becomes exposed to it and needs that. And it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to a policeman that's close to you in your districts. It's a matter of that it is going to happen, and it's going to be in the future. I think one of the things, and of course, being from Central Louisiana, and I know Representative Johnson, we used to hear this all the time about when you'd say you were from Pineville, the thing was, oh, you're from where Central is, where they have all the crazy people, which that's a bad thing, but that was the association that we had. But at one time here in Central Louisiana, as part on the Central grounds, we had drug rehabilitation services. We had the places to bring people that we came in contact, and we've lost some of those. While I believe that criminal penalties is something where you have to hold somebody accountable, a couple of the things that we need to focus on too is trying to get back to some of those community models to be able to get people the help that they actually need. And I understand the whole argument about people have to want the help and all of that, but I think we've got to figure out a dual focus path here. Representative Johnson, one of the things that we didn't bring up, and I just want to make sure to talk about real quick, is while people think that resolutions aren't important in a lot of things that y'all do, they just see resolutions as something in general. This last session, you authored a resolution dealing with Social Security. Do you want to talk about a little bit about that for a second?
Yeah, it's one of the most unfair provisions in our law. So many of our law enforcement, fire people, first responders have second jobs, have second careers where they pay Social Security into the system, just like everybody else. But when it comes time to retire, to get those funds for your spouse or your family, or if something happens to you, it is little or nothing compared to those who've paid in and did not have a pension, state retirement. So there have been several bills sponsored in the past in DC, and it will require something in Washington to remedy that. I have, and this is the first time I think it's really been attempted. We are as a legislature unanimously support the idea of working with the federal government to end the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provisions of Social Security. So we've taken that, and along with the Speaker and the President, members of both retirement committees, perhaps the governor, and we'll be meeting with not only our Louisiana delegation in Washington, but members of the other 16 states who have the same issue, and also the authors of legislation that is sitting dormant in committee in the House and the Senate, and try to push that legislation that will eliminate those provisions and simply do what's fair. It's as much as they're printing money and handing it out for just about everything right now, and yet people who've actually paid into the system are being cheated. They're not getting what they've paid into the system. And so we're trying to join forces with other states, with our state delegation, who all support this, both parties, and try to do something about it. So I'm hoping in the next 6 months to a year that we'll see some movement on those bills. We're told that the president will sign such a bill. When he was running for president, he said that he was supportive of eliminating those provisions, and all of it's under the guise of Social Security Fairness Act. So we will be pushing that beyond the state level, and hopefully do something that will benefit our first responders, our law enforcement, our firefighters, to help them once they do call upon the government to get the Social Security they've paid in. So we could use your help. I know you have retirement leadership in the state. We'd like to have them involved with us, along with the state retirees, to see how far we can get with this bill.
Sure. We had put actually about 2 years ago, pre-COVID, Representative Graves had put together a coalition of people, and we worked with
He's
him.
doing that this time.
And,
He's helping us with that right now, and
right.
so is Senator Kennedy.
And I saw last week Representative Letlow has authored some legislation. Hers is a little bit unique, where there's a cap on funding, and I haven't had the chance to read it, but I just saw the press.
It doesn't go as far as we want it to, but it is at least a step in the right direction that can be amended, or at least she could take that energy and direct it toward one of the bills that have already been filed, and maybe co-author that legislation to move it forward. But we're going to put a enthusiastic effort into trying to move that to passage.
And as a soon to be retiree, I really do appreciate your effort in doing that myself. So that's one of the things. So we're kind of Representative Fontenot. Do you have anything else that you on your list that you want to discuss?
No, I think we've covered it. I think we're probably getting to the end of your time frame. We're welcome to do this anytime again. There are some things we should talk about, and that's truth in sentencing, and some things that law enforcement professional standpoint, we want to ensure that we kind of start getting corrected, and not just because we want to get it corrected, but the liberal side of this business is pushing where people shouldn't go to prison at all. And you'll never get me there. So maybe we'll schedule this again. Darrell, I appreciate you having both I and Representative Johnson on. And I've always said, just know that we stand with you. And, your members need to know, Darrell, that you work extremely hard for them. And the relationships that you share with us legislators is the reason why your voice is being heard. And that continues to be of importance. Know we stand with you, not just because we support you, but from my standpoint, because I'm one of you. And I've enjoyed my time in the law enforcement professional career, and it's brought me to this Capitol. It was those friends I made in that business that's taken me to this Marble Hall building. So proud to stand with you and look forward to continue to doing it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Representative Johnson, anything wrapping up on the?
No, we just appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I support you. The governor's, sometimes when you take a strong stand, you pay the price. And I know you have, and were moved off of the commission unfairly after a stellar career. And I'm working on trying to do something about that. That we're pushing for that reappointment. And I'm sorry that you got those shots as a result of your strong stand. But I think your membership needs to know that you're only going to get that if you're being effective. And I appreciate what you do. I can't think of anybody else better to be on criminal justice than Brian Fontenot. He's the kind of guy ought to be chairman of that committee, and I'm going to be certainly hoping that he'll be around long enough that comes into fruition, because he certainly is a leader in these areas, and I lean on him quite a bit. But just want to say thank you for this. Thank you for including me, and certainly have an open door for all of your members, and certainly for you anytime.
Sure. And I'm going to offer on one of the things that we've done. First of all, I appreciate both of you participating in this and being our strong advocates on law enforcement and on the different committees. I'll offer you, we have the Zoom platform. We have it to do our meetings virtually because of COVID and other restrictions. And a lot of times it's easier for our board to get together and do this rather than travel. So I offer it to both of you. If there's any time you want to put a law enforcement group together or webinar type thing for a huge group instead of traveling somewhere, I offer this platform to you at any time you think it's available for us to put something together like this. Joe, do you have anything before we get off?
Yeah, I was taught at a very young age that there's no problem in this world that can't be tied to poor communication. And so first of all, Darrell, thank you for putting it. Good job putting this together. And thank you to the legislature for participating, because Mike mentioned early on in this conversation that communication wasn't clear. That's everybody's fault that's involved, because, if we weren't all at the table. If we're at the table communicating, we can accomplish anything.
A meeting like this with members of committees who are going to have to deal with this issue in February, before maybe after some of the bills are pre-filed, would be very helpful. And I would certainly participate in that, and because we certainly want to be in line with your folks, and
right.
knowing the information and all the information, because when you're a legislator and you hear from your sheriff or the sheriff's association and the city police association and the state police commander
and the
saying
DA.
This is a good bill, we support it, we'd like your support, and you don't hear a lot of arguments against it, it's real easy to push that green button. But had we been given that additional information, I think it would have been helpful. And it may have gotten out there to some. So let's try to, I'll pledge to be a part of that conversation.
Yes.
And I assume I'll still be on civil law, and that bill will probably come back through civil law, and we'll certainly be more equipped to argue against it.
So I'll make sure, just to kind of end it up, as we end here again, thank everybody for participating, and we look forward to all this in the future.